Political centrism, the set of beliefs known for its success back in 1930s Europe, whose proponents were rewarded for their political acumen after a few years by getting to be the smuggest people in the concentration camp. Did you know that Hitler has lied on average about 10 times a day for the past 5 years? We know, we fact-checked him. How do you respond to that? Yeah, that's very nice, please step into the chamber now. Fast forward 100 years and the political center around the Western world is once again dying. The old establishment parties are decaying, breaking apart and becoming irrelevant in most of the developed democratic world. The most glaring example here is the United States, where the centrist Democrats, led by energetic, charismatic, dying septuagenarians, were beaten even by the MAGA movement. And so Democrats' in-house necromancers have been working around the clock to try and reanimate their recent presidential candidate for an interview to help regain lost support. Unfortunately, Joe Biden's earthly remains failed to make any waves due to its advanced state of decay.
Regain control of what we invented, the control of the future.
So centrists look at the current political landscape. They look at people's overwhelming dissatisfaction and disillusionment with the status quo and ask themselves, what could be the problem? So people are like, look, the problem is that we don't feel like the system is working for us anymore. We get poorer while the rich get richer. It feels like the economy has become a scheme to funnel our money to the top and keep it there. Prices are up, housing is unaffordable, everything around us is turning to shit due to corporate profiteering. Google is unusable now, Facebook and Twitter are 24/7 Nazi rallies, AI is flooding everything, public services are being cut back and or privatized, our income doesn't keep up with inflation, and we generally feel like our votes don't matter anymore because you guys are doing nothing to fix systemic issues. That's the problem. And centrists are like, yeah, okay, that's great, whatever. Anyway, what could be the problem? But what's that? Here comes a new challenger who has listened to all your problems and decided that the solution to systemic issues with the global economy is ethnic nationalism. If you hate brown people, gays and or Jews hard enough, the systemic problems will be gone or something, I don't know. The far-right's world is one where all economic issues, the systemic problems, the wealth inequality, pretty much stays the exact same, but now pride is banned. Also, democracy is basically gone, so, you know, mission accomplished. Like in Hungary, where after 15 years of based Viktor Orban and his Christian nationalist government, Hungary has the worst healthcare in Europe, one of the worst education systems, the rail network is falling apart, social mobility is nearly zero, with Hungarians paying the highest taxes in Europe. Meanwhile, Orban lives in a castle. So do his cronies, and his various other supplicants drive around the country in Ferraris, Lamborghinis and Bentleys, and are also seen chilling on multi-million-dollar super yachts off the Italian coast. Orban also had a football stadium built in his home village because, fuck it, why not? Elsewhere, centrist politicians look upon the surging far-right and ask, oh, how could this happen? How could the far-right become so popular after we let them openly propagandize and undermine our democracy for a decade, mainly through social media, which we refused to regulate? Who would have known that they are a threat to democracy after they spent the last 10 years screaming about rigged elections and inciting mobs to forcefully overturn elections, the results of which they didn't like? We are quite simply flabbergasted by these developments. Who would have thought that letting malicious fake news run rampant across the media is a bad idea? In the so-called free marketplace of ideas, the truth does not stand a chance against billionaire-funded propaganda. Thankfully, Ground News is here to help balance the scales in your favor. Ground News gathers, well, news from all over the world, enabling you to see how different sources report on the same story, giving you a more complete, balanced overview of events. Let's take an example. The story about Putin not attending peace talks in Turkey. At the time of recording, this story has been covered by 386 articles with a fairly even distribution of 58 left-leaning, 52 right-leaning, and 74 centrist sources. Here we can see that most sources are of high factuality, and below you'll find a breakdown of their ownership structure. Ground News also comes with a bias comparison feature, summarizing the aspects each political side chooses to focus on. In this case, left-leaning sources focus on Putin being bad faith and manipulative by not attending peace talks, while the right focuses on Putin chickening out and blowing his big chance with Trump. Ground News is your ultimate guide in today's news ecosystem, enabling you to stay on top of the news cycle. Go to ground.news/Adam or scan this QR code to receive 40% off their Vantage plan with unlimited access to every feature. Or you can try their Pro plan for just $1 a month. Thank you for checking out Ground News. The only political force willing to stand up to the far right is various leftist political movements, many of which have seen a considerable boost in support recently. Germany's Die Linke rebounded during the last election and gained 25 additional seats in the Bundestag. This is after Sarah Wagenknecht split the party in half and went on to found her brand new Nazi Bolshevik party, the pro-Russian Leftist party, which also just happens to oppose non-white immigration. And it didn't make it into the Bundestag. Ooh, close enough. The left's performance has been even more impressive in France, where the new Popular Front coalition had gained 57 additional seats, thus becoming the largest force in French parliament. So, we have our political force opposing the far right. Right? Not so fast, yelled the centrist. Leftists are also radicals, and the radicalism is bad. Therefore, the far right and the far left are just as bad. One wants more public housing and higher taxes on the wealthy, while the other wants to put LGBT people in concentration camps and purge the country of non-whites. They are literally the same. But centrist politicians are in a bind here. They need to go somewhere because their current position is untenable. If they don't go either left or right, the only way for them is down. So some of them figured their best shot is to start moving towards the far right. But hey, they can be fair and reasonable about it. The far right wants to do a second Holocaust? Well, the centrists can surely arrive at a reasonable compromise. How about a half Holocaust? Which is basically what happened in 1940s Hungary, by the way, where Jews in the countryside were all killed, while Jews in the capital were mostly spared. Initially. Nowadays, the UK's Keir Starmer and his Labour Party are perhaps the best example of centrist rightward movement. Starmer has managed, for some reason, to steer a formerly progressive and left-leaning party towards policies championed by the likes of Nigel Farage and his far-right Reform UK. Out of nowhere, Starmer came out against trans people and various other progressive causes. Then, once in power, he went on to do right-wing austerity, public sector cuts, business deregulation, in addition to announcing large-scale deportations. Fast forward to now, and this masterful political gambit has collapsed the Labour Party and boosted Reform UK to first place in national polls. So, you know, oops. This strategy of let's try to deflate the far right by copying them would be absolutely brilliant if it worked. However, reality seems to be in denial about Starmer's and similar centrist ideas. Turns out, if you become a bad copy of the far right, you send a message to the public that these ideas are now mainstream and acceptable. Not only that, but you prompt people to ask the question, if we are voting for far right stuff anyway, why not just vote for the real thing? And British people do. Macron seems to share much of Starmer's sentiment. In the aftermath of his masterful snap election gambit that saw his party crater, an alliance of leftist parties received the largest share of votes. Traditionally, the new French Prime Minister is to be nominated from the ranks of the largest party, which Macron decided to ignore, because according to him, leftists are just as bad as the far right. One wants to purge France of non-whites and degenerates, while the other wants more public housing and gay rights. Literally the same. But what if you are a centrist politician who actually sees the writing on the wall, who realizes that the center is untenable and that moving right means empowering the far right? So, how about we move left instead? No. Wait, who's that? Oh right, it's the billion-dollar donor class that finances the centrist political machine made up of people the left wants to tax. For them, the question of should centrists go left or right is basically, do I want my taxes higher or lower? Oh well, far right it is then. Some of you might die, non-whites, LGBT people, political opponents, but that's a sacrifice the top 1% is willing to make for tax cuts. But suppose that you are the leader of a progressive political party, or a centrist party even, that is both able and willing to move left. What can you do to address the problems we're having? The funneling of money to the top, the decay of public services. How do you regain people's trust? How do you regain the electorate's trust? Well, first off, we need to understand what happened. The fallen standard of living tells a story. The great post-war social contract was shattered. In our home, across the ocean, in the Western world. Now, the welfare state is nowhere to be found, and in the 1980s, the top marginal tax rate was the first to perish. Soon, the finance sector, billionaires all, claimed parts of the economy. Their greed from their newfound wealth triggered the 2008 economic crash. A crisis from which no ordinary person arose. A crisis leading to abandonment by the people's trust. Long story short, the system no longer abides by the post-World War II unspoken social contract. And that social contract is this. If you work a full-time job, you should not have to struggle. You should not have money problems or lack in any basic needs, and you should be able to afford a reasonable amount of comfort and luxury besides that. Basically, if you work full-time, you should be able to afford a middle-class lifestyle. Period. If we have billionaires taking joyrides into space or apartheid babies running the US government, why can't we also have cheap housing or cheap utilities? Why can't we provide everyone with a base amount of food so that no one has to worry about feeding themselves or their family in the developed world? This is the billion-dollar question. So here are some step 1 type measures a government can take to start regaining people's trust and stem the oncoming tide of the far right. Make public utilities public. Here in Czechia, I once saw a job advert for ČEZ, that's the biggest utility company in the country, for electricity and gas. They were looking for a full-time stock market day trader. But just why does a utility company need a stock market day trader? What part of supplying the population with electricity and gas involves stock market day trading? None, of course. The Czech utility sector and many others in many other countries had been thoroughly financialized. They are part of the finance sector now, and this might seem like a good idea on paper. You know, we have this big company with all these assets, so why not use its wealth to make even more money on the stock market? But the stock market doesn't always go up, does it? Sometimes it goes the opposite direction, especially if a bunch of finance bros start gambling with it. And that's when the government needs to do expensive bailouts. If you put a company on the stock market, it will become far more vulnerable to market cycles, so why put them on the stock market? This is what Yanis Varoufakis calls the financialization of everything. Public utilities should be public, but not on the stock market. They should be non-profit. The goal is to provide people with services, not to make money. But the financialization of state services is still the lesser evil. Worse is when a democratic state lets go of a sector seemingly for no reason. This is called privatization, the only real purpose of which is to serve up more of the economy to the oligarchs. Why do you think the US government is privatizing its space sector, cutting the budget of NASA and increasingly relying on SpaceX? And the answer is, so that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos can own the sector. Simple as that. Meanwhile, down here on Earth, have you ever wondered why there aren't any state-run housing construction companies? It's all private developers now. And how are these developers faring? Well, if we choose to ignore the ongoing catastrophic housing crisis across the Western world for the past decade, then not too bad, I guess. Yes, the housing sector has also been thoroughly privatized and financialized. The housing sector should be non-profit and publicly owned as far as it can provide everyone with housing, should they need it. If someone wants to operate a private real estate market beyond that, that's alright. The idea is that no one has to rely on the private market because there is always a strong, high-quality public option. Also, let's get a food UBI going. That's universal basic income. Let's give people a set amount of meal vouchers each month, which they can use at grocery stores and restaurants. Wow, would you look at that? We have restored the post-World War II social contract. People now have affordable housing, utilities and groceries, putting them in a vastly improved financial situation and taking a ton of pressure and worries off their backs. What's that? The far right stopped rising because their message of everything is going to shit and only white nationalism can help us no longer resonates because things are no longer going to shit? Wow, imagine my shock. Deprivatizing and definancializing our basic services means taking power away from the oligarchs and giving it to our democratically run states. And I would do the same thing with healthcare, education, and also internet service providers. I believe this to be the first step to regain people's trust in the system and stop the rise of the far right. Let's take back control, one could say, but this time for real.